difficult than traditional disasters. And our system is just not, it's not prepared and designed to handle that yet.
Thank you. Senator Lankford, you're recognized for your questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, all of you. Obviously, this is a national issue that we got to continue to be able to focus on. Appreciate the insight from folks that are on the ground. I want to talk a little bit about the permitting piece of this. Ms. Barnes, you brought this up earlier on it. What permitting issues do we need to try to be able to work through on federal permitting that post-wildfire or pre-wildfire that need to be done? So any ideas on, Ms. Barnes, you mentioned this earlier in your opening statement, but anyone can jump in on that.
Yeah, I can start on that, and thank you for the question. I think it's just that permitting reform of the alignment, the clearing indexes that we need to receive, the NEPA part of it. There's issues with contracting.
So kind of zero in, what's the NEPA piece?
Yeah, so NEPA often, and in Utah, gets held up a lot on litigation. That takes people away from that work that gets done on the ground. It takes a lot of staff time, a lot of money.
Is this post-fire or pre-fire?
Both. Any type of mitigation work or post-fire work that we're doing.
So is the issue there for NEPA, not that NEPA exists, it's the litigation around it, or what needs to be resolved?
It's the procedures that we need to go through on NEPA that get held up in litigation in order to get the projects done. And so working on those to find more efficiencies through that process, I think would be the best thing to avoid being held up in litigation. That takes a lot of staff time. It takes away from getting work done on the ground. And then having a clear sense of what can be done as far as mechanisms that we can do in the forest and categorical exclusions, what we can do to get through the process faster. The faster we can get through the process, the more work that we can get done on the ground.
Okay, when you talk about categorical exclusions, again, is this before fire and mediation, before or post?
I would say it would be both. In Utah, we're really looking at, we're years behind on getting work done. And so we need to be able to get in there, get work done. And then after a fire, there's an immediate need to get things done after a fire happens. But in order to get ahead of the wildfire crisis, we need to start mitigating hazardous fuels immediately.
Okay, any other permitting comments anybody make? Go ahead.
Thank you, Senator. Relative to forest restoration, pre-fire work.
I'm going to make sure your microphone's on there. Yeah, that's right.
Relative to forest restoration and the work that's necessary to improve the quality, habitat in the area, reduce the threat of wildfire. A couple other tools are that both FEMA and the Forest Service are typically limited in their willingness to allow third parties to potentially fund conducting the actual NEPA process on their behalf. So they're very limited in the resources that they have available internally to actually do that physical work on the ground, go out and do the cultural surveys, biological surveys. And we're utilizing, for example, in our area, our Good Neighbor Authority with the Forest Service to be able to actually perform some of that work on their behalf. They still go through the regulatory process. They still have to approve, or typically they go to a CADX, but we are able to step in and help with those costs and or resources that we have under contract to perform that work by credible, licensed professionals. And so bringing more flexibility, we approached FEMA about doing this for a fuels reduction project that we have in our area that's 4 years in, and we're still waiting for the environmental to be done. And that would have been a fairly simple solution. Again, we're not taking over the regulatory responsibility, but providing them with the legwork, the folks, boots on the ground to get the work done.
Yeah, obviously while you're waiting on permitting, you're dealing with the potential of a pretty expensive wildfire, and for some reason wildfires don't wait on NEPA permits.
They do not.
They actually go through.
We've seen that repeatedly.
Let me ask just a couple of clarifications. I brought up in my opening statement as well about power and power lines and sparking red flag fire warnings and what we deal with at times. Anything that you have seen that has been effective for reducing the number of wildfires caused by power lines without actually just shutting down all power to communities as well?
Yeah, well, and as you know, I mean, oftentimes wind. So if you have another type of storm, it can cause that. And I mean, some of the mitigation measures that you use for hurricanes or tornadoes or straight line winds, you know, here in the east are effective for preventing this from happening. The problem is, you know, we've mitigated a lot of these things in the east because of the threat of hurricanes and tornadoes and things like that, but we haven't done that in the west.
Okay, is it just a rule, or is it just a physical structure that's attached to the line?
I think it's just been more of a matter of the risk and the threat over time, and where most of the federal money has gone over the years. You know, most of the federal disaster money and mitigation money has gone to those other.
Yeah, a lot of those are not federal dollars. Those are local power companies and co-ops and others on that. It's just, is it, what I'm asking is the way they're managing the line, or is it a piece of hardware or something else that's missing or software that's missing to be able to manage it? Go ahead, someone knows.
Yeah, I can touch on what Utah's done on that. I think it's a collaboration effort with those power companies. In Utah, we have taken a stance of identifying where that risk is on those power lines, if it's a high, medium, or low risk, and then working with those agencies to mitigate that risk. Developing fire mitigation plans with those agencies of how they are going to manage the risk that they have around those lines is very important.
Okay, Mr. Ferguson.
Great question, sir. And in Nevada, we've taken a little more proactive response, kind of following the Utah lines, where we prioritize what zone that power line is in and the odds of it starting a fire. And then our power company has actually contracted local government fire departments to go out and do the pole grubbing and the clearing out the lines. And then the power company is working with the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada to replace the at-risk power poles. A lot of the infrastructure is old. And I think that speaks to what the GAO representative was talking about, was on the East Coast. More of that stuff's probably been more recently replaced because of a disaster. We just haven't had the disaster to cause that power pole to need to be replaced yet. So now they're going in and replacing the poles. They're able to wrap the poles with special material that actually expands to absorb the heat. So that way we keep those lines in place when a fire does come through as well.
Okay, that's really helpful. Mr. Chairman, I would take up anyone that's here that's willing to be able to have a chainsaw in their backyard and be able to bring it on over to be able to help us, because we deal with these red cedars, as I mentioned before, which are explosive to us. They're a nice, pretty tree. They're terrible pollen in the springtime, and they're terrible for being a fire problem for us, and they're an invasive species. It's one of the areas that we've got to deal with on mitigation. I know where we're clearing forests and trying to be able to manage underbrush and things that are there. We have the same issue in some of our open prairie areas as well, and we'll have to be able to work through processes to be able to resolve that in the days ahead. So thank you to all of you.
Very good, Senator Lankford. And I appreciate you warning us on